What's going on, boys? No Guys here. Welcome back to another video. In today's video I'm going to go over what formations counter the 4-2-3-1. Now I know many of you guys have difficulties playing against a 4-2-3-1, especially if someone's got tactics like this. These are my tactics that I use for the 4-2-3-1. I'm pretty sure you've seen these in my videos and I explain why it's very effective. Now generally speaking, when it comes to formations, the idea of what formation counters what isn't really a viable option for a higher tier player. What I mean by that is if you give two players, so let's say for example my opponent's using a 4-2-3-1, I might match it, and generally speaking the better player will win that situation. Now most of the time I can use a 3-5-2 against most players, or the 5-3-2, and win. So although formations have its benefits and its pros and its cons, countering a formation should not be the be all end all, if that does make sense. But there are some formations that work well. Now generally speaking, the 4-2-3-1 is one of the most compact formations in the game. You got two banks of CDMs, you got your bank of four, but what makes the formation even better is that you have all three players on comeback and defense. So when you're basically defending, you basically defend in somewhat of like a 4-4-1-1, and that's why it's really hard to break down the 4-2-3-1. Now the reason why, especially over the 4-4-2, why it's hard to break down the 4-2-3-1 is, let's say for example your opponent has the ball, let's say over here outside the box. Typically speaking, in a formation like the 4-4-2, normally there's a massive gap between the two CDMs and the two strikers, and that is why sometimes people struggle with the 4-4-2 to defend. But with the 4-3-3, because you got that additional cam, if your opponent has the ball outside the box, you can use your cam to defend against your opponent's midfielder or his striker and still retain your two CDMs in position. That is one of the reasons why the 4-3-3 and the 4-2-1 are really good defensively, is because you have those two CDMs in place. So the question is, well, how do you break two CDMs and I would say a cam that can come back and defend? The best, I would say, is two striker formations. So I would say you could try to match it with a 4-2-3-1, but unless you're very good at using a 4-2-3-1, you'd probably will struggle because you only have one striker and a cam. The best way to beat this, I would say, is a two striker formation. I would say typically speaking with two cams and a striker. So a 4-1-2-1-2 is a very good example. So the 4-1, so this is my 3-5-2 tactics. I'll get on to the 4-1-2-1-2 second variation in a second. These are my 3-5-2 tactics. These tactics work very well. Now as you can see, I've got stay forward on both my central strikers. You can put comeback and defense on one of them if you want to, but I typically leave stay forward on both of them, and I leave my cam on stay forward. So if your opponent is playing, let's say, a 4-2-3-1, let's say he's got his bank of four, let's just roughly say something like this, and he's got his two CDMs, you're going to have basically a CDM for every single one of it. So if you have the ball with your cam, should I say, your opponent's going to have a CDM for every one of your attackers. That means that you're going to have that cam player available. Now why this is important is if your opponent, let's just mark this out in a 4-2-3-1. So in a 3-5-2 you attack with two strikers, you have a cam, a left mid and a right mid and two DMs. Okay, so when you have the ball, generally speaking you'll have the ball with your two CDMs, your opponent's lamb and your opponent's ram are going to be marking your left mid and right mid, and generally speaking in the middle, that's where you create the mismatch. Now, this is the thing. Normally, the striker will be in front of the two strikers, right? So that means, generally speaking, it'll be like this. So let's say you've got the ball with your two CDMs. You're going to be basically next to the cam. You're going to have a left mid, your right mid, your two strikers like over here against the two like that and like that. Now, the benefit is over here is, if he tries to defend with his two CDMs, there's already going to be a numerical advantage in midfield with a 3-5-2. That's one of the reasons why the 3-5-2 works really well against the 4-2-3-1. But even better is if he tries to run out with this cam. Let's say he doesn't use his two CDMs. You're still going to have three players up against his two cams. Oh, sorry, his two CDMs. So that's the benefit of that singular cam that you do have and the two strikers, is that you create that numerical advantage up front. In fact, most defensive formations, the best thing you can actually be is as offensive as possible with your central players. It's no point, for example, overloading. So I see some people use the 3-4-3. Now, I'm not saying it's a bad idea, but let's say the 3-4-3. Let's just go over this because it seems to be a popular formation that some people like to use. It doesn't really help because in this situation, your opponent's got, let's say he's got a back line of four, and he's got two, let's say he's playing overload the ball side, he's got two CDMs. It's really hard to break through. Let's say he's got a cam as well. Let's say a cam, two CDMs like that. It's really hard to break through like one center mid and just one striker. And that is why, although a formation may appear to be more attacking, at the end of the day, it's about who do you have for who. And that is why, and the same idea, the 4-1-2-1-2 second variation and the 4-3-3 are really good options. Now, if we go over to the 4-3-3 first, These are my tactics for the 4-3-3. Feel free to copy these. These are my very attacking. This is normally a tactic that I would use if I'm losing in the game. Let's say I'm 1-0 down, 2-0 down. I need to start pressing, and let's say it's around 70 minutes. Then I would normally change this formation. So I wouldn't normally use it straight away. Pressure and every touch, 4, 6, 4, and then I'll quickly go over the instructions. Feel free to pause this at any point. And don't forget, I got a video on for each of these formations on my channel as well. But let's say, for example, over here, and ignore Fred, by the way, I sub him off. But let's say, for example, if your opponent is playing again the 4-2-3-1, again you have the same situation where you have, you know, a cam, a left centre mid, and a right centre mid, and 2 strikers. So even though your opponent has 2 CDMs, because you have a cam, 2 centre mids, and 2 strikers up against your opponent's 2 CDMs, it makes it much easier for you to break through. And that is why formations like even the 5-3-2. Now, the 5-3-2 is a really good formation against the 4-2-3-1. But only if you have one of the players on balanced or get forward. I normally have the 2 of the outside players on get forward. Now this is important because if you're playing against, let's say, the 4-2-3-1, and let's say, for example, you got 2 CDMs, and let's say you got 2 strikers. Now that means you're going to have 1 striker for every CDM. So 2 strikers against 2 CDMs. Now the reason why this is very much difficult is a lot of lower tier players, they don't know how to trigger players using the L1 button correctly. Some higher tier players, let's say around gold 2, gold 1, they may know how to trigger players using the L1 button, but they don't know when to do it. And that's why it's inherently harder for someone to use a 5-3-2 against a 4-2-3-1. Why? Is because the cam is naturally more offensive. Now, what's become more apparent is what I realize is people, when they're losing in FIFA, they get very frustrated. They play very quick, fast football. Now, if you're not patient and you're not very vigilant in terms of where your players are, you need to be able to react according to your opponent. And that's why, again, the cam is beneficial. But even in this situation, if your left centre mid and right centre mid, they overlap, or even if the centre mid joins the attack, it's about timing. And you have to make sure your timing is on lock. And that is why I wouldn't recommend using a 5-3-2 up against, I would say, for example, a 4-2-3-1. In fact, I'd recommend the 5-2-1-2. Now, it's the exact same position. Now, you're going to say to me, hang on, isn't the benefit of this formation the wing play? The wingers are completely unmarked. Yes, you are completely right. But what if your opponent goes to an overload the ball side system? If he's got 4 players like that and he's got his entire team locked out like that outside the box, then what do you do? Now, of course, you can distribute the ball to your wide players as much as you want. You can even go down the wing. But if they're very stable in the block, in the middle corridor, how do you break it down? And that's where, again, the 2 strikers and the cam come into the biggest, I would say, the biggest point of the game, where the 2 CDMs kind of match up against your 2 strikers. The benefit of this formation is that, because I'll tell you the secret with the 5-2-1-2. Now, this formation has been meta since FIFA 19. For those of you that are real OGs, you will know that I made this formation in FIFA 19 and it was meta since then. For those of you that kept using it, you'll be laughing now because you know you've already learned to use it, probably an expert at it. But for you players that maybe changed to a 5 at the back recently this year, what you don't realize is when these guys go forward, if your opponent is playing a 4-2-3-1, your opponent's lamb and ram get dragged out to the side. And then what happens is that his back 4, they stay in shape like this, and then he has 2 CDMs. And then it makes it much easier for you to attack, because then you can use your 2 centre mids to distribute the ball, and then you have your cam and your 2 strikers up against your opponent's 2 CDMs. The benefit of this is because your opponent's lamb and ram are kind of pushed out wide because of the 4 backs overlapping. Don't forget, these 4 backs have to overlap. You can put them on join the attack, or you can manually put them on D-pad tactic attacking 4 backs. But when you do that, what happens is that your opponent's formation messes up. And that's why the 5-2-1-2 is probably the best formation for countering the 4-2-3-1. Try this in game. Whenever your opponent uses the 4-2-3-1, be patient, but look at how your opponent separates out. So you'll see, for example, his lamb and his ram will be over here. So both his lamb and ram will be over here, occupying and marking your left back and right back. Then you'll have 4 players in the middle, and that's under the assumption you're using overload the ball side. Then you'll have 2 strikers for every 2 of his centre backs, and you'll have your cam as well. So you'll have like a system like this, and then what you'll have is your 2 centre mids, and you'll have, for example, his 2 CDMs. So it'll be something like this. Now, The benefit is already there's a mismatch, and that is why the 5-2-1-2 and generally speaking the 3-5-2 are very, very effective against the 4-2-3-1. Have a go in the game. I would say go into your next game. If your opponent's using a 4-2-3-1, it's going to be difficult to break down. Even if your opponent uses a 4-2-3-1, there's no magic formation where if you use a formation, you can counter it directly, but it does exploit weaknesses. And the benefit of course, the fullbacks joining the attack is that when they're very wide, they kind of, as I said, adjust the left attacker mid, right attacker mid to go wide, and then that gives you more space to maneuver. So if your left back and right back is here occupying his left back and right back or whatever, or his lamb and ram, that gives you more space to work in the middle with your 2 strikers and your cam and your 2 centre mids. And that is why even if he defends correctly and he's got everyone on comeback and defence, it's going to be very hard for you to defend. But also the flip side of that is if you do lose the ball, you've only got 3 at the back. So obviously do bear in mind that if you do lose the ball, you could get contested at the back. But generally speaking, if you're up against a 4-2-3-1, I'd recommend these 3 formations. I'd recommend a 4-3-1-2 or a 4-1-2-1-2 second variation. Anyone with a cam and a striker. The 5-2-1-2, where again you get the 2 strikers and the cam. It's a bit more offensive than the 5-3-1-2 because this way you have the left mid and right mid join the attack, which gives you even more options down the wing. Let's say the central areas are kind of compromised, your opponent's using overload the ball side. Then a 5-2-1-2 is a tactic to go to if your opponent uses overload the ball side. And then the 3-5-2 is basically a 4-1-2-1-2. People don't know this, but it's basically, if you think about it in the central areas, it's basically a CDM, left centre mid, right centre mid, cam and 2 strikers. The only difference is you have the left mid and right mid that are also closer, and that way it makes it easier for you to attack. So once you change to a 2 striker and a cam formation, the 4-2-3-1 will be easier for you to break down. Remember this when you're up against a 4-2-3-1. At the end of the day, most formations, when we're able to break down other formation, it only depends on the player itself. If you give a 4-2-3-1 to a gold 3 player, and let's say a silver 1 player uses a 5-2-1-2 against him, it doesn't mean you're going to beat him straight away. You have to understand how good you are. Likewise, if someone used, for example, if I was using a 4-2-3-1, and someone, for example, used a 3-5-2 or the 5-2-1-2 against me, because I consider myself a very good defender, it's going to be very hard to break me down regardless you're trying to counter me or not. So I understand at the end of the day it's also the player's ability, not just the formation. But I would recommend any of those 3 formations against the 4-1-2-1-2, 4-2-3-1. That's the 4-1-2-1-2, 4-3-1-2, 5-2-1-2, 3-5-2. The key thing is being the cam and the striker. Now if you can, I would recommend putting all of the players on stay forward. That way when you do get the ball back, if for example he has the ball and he gets dispossessed, his 2 CDMs will be here, and that way you can play a quick 1-2 and you'll be up against your opponent's back 4. So if you're playing that counter-attack game, you're going to have 3 players up against your opponent's just singular 2 strikers. If you really, really want to, you can put the left mid and right mid on stay forward, and that way you can completely break down a 4-2-3-1 on the counter-attack, but then you'll be defending with only of course 5 players, that being the back 3 and the 2 centre mid, so do bear that in mind as well. But that's just kind of the best formation to counter the 4-2-3-1. Hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching, boys. Take it easy, and I'll catch you next time. Peace out.